Okay, doing a quick demo for Gino here because we have a problem. Nice mesh, nice high poly, working on a low poly here, but this braid thing, it's really nice, but it's going to be almost impossible to get this down under 5,000. Even here, this version is still almost the entire poly count. So what can we do in this situation? Well, this piece is almost flat, right? We can see it's basically like a flat cylinder with gaps. But if we could bake this onto some kind of cylinder, and we could somehow see through all the holes, that would be perfect, wouldn't it? That would save us a load of polygons. The poly count would basically be this 64. If this was our mesh, so we delete, not that, delete object mode, grab these edges, delete this. If that was our output mesh that we were baking the high poly onto, we'd be left with a really low poly count and would save loads of polygons for the rest of the model. So how can we make it that we can see through these gaps, but there actually is geometry there? Well, we can use an opacity masked material. So I'm going to delete everything in the scene apart from this one piece, which is going to be our high poly cage thing. So I'm going to go modify, convert smooth mesh preview to polygons. Let's delete everything else. Object mode. Center that on the grid. Okay, so this is our high poly mesh of 150,000-ish polygons. And our low poly mesh is literally just going to be one cylinder. So one principle about masked materials is we want to make sure we have as little transparent area as possible. Rendering transparent materials is expensive, and the more you can see other pixels through transparent pixels, the more expensive it is. So as a result, the more wasted space, i.e. the more translucent parts you have, the more expensive the model is to render. So in this case, we want to bring it as close to as we can to the edge, leaving a little bit of gap just so we can make sure the bake comes out properly. And I'm going to scale this so it's kind of central. Let's check our UVs. One thing you're going to have to be aware of is if you do make a masked material for a part of your mesh, it's going to need to be on a separate material because you don't want the rest of your bottle that's going to be opaque to be on a masked material. Even if it's going to be opaque in the mask, it's still more expensive to have it on a masked material. So we want to make sure this is just on the part we need. Assign a separate material to it. Create a new camera-based projection, make a cut, and unfold. In this case, let's cut it into two pieces so it lays out a little bit more efficiently. So here and here, cut, unfold, orient shells, layout. So it's not a very efficient use of the UV space, but we don't want to have a million cuts everywhere. So let's export this high poly. We're going to call it Gino underscore high. Low poly is going to be obviously Gino underscore low. And let's jump into Substance Painter. So texture set settings, bake mesh maps, 2K. We don't have an ID map in this case. Grab the high poly, Geno high. I'm going to leave the values as they are for now. So we do need to tweak the values. You can see we're losing a little bit. So we need to tweak the frontal and rear distances. 0.025 is a good ballpark for to start with. So there's a result. You can see there's a problem, right? This background is all messed up, but we don't need to worry about that because that's all going to be transparent. So let's see if we have a map already that we can use as our opacity map. So we're going to go down to the mesh maps. These are the baked mesh maps. Curvature could be a good starting point. Surprise thickness wasn't better. Actually, what we could do on the high poly, if we gave this a new Lambert of, I don't know, a color, whatever, export this again, and then bake with ID. I have a feeling we might need two colors for ID to work, but we can test it anyway. No, it worked. It worked. But it's not a good result. It stretched the ID map. Well, curvature is going to be our best starting point. If not, we can always do it by hand in Photoshop to make the mask. So I'm not too worried. Let's export the textures. And I'm going to make a new folder on the desktop called my Unreal custom packed export setting uses the, I can show you actually. It uses the save file name. So because I haven't saved this project, it's called Unreal Engine because that's the name of the template. So one thing I have to do first is save this. I'm just going to go to my Geno folder. I'm going to call this Geno.spp. Now, if I go to export, we can see it's called Geno Low. So here's my preset. You can obviously pause this and copy it if you'd like it. Where is it? Unreal Custom Packed. So all I've done here is tweak the names. It's exporting TGAs. It has the correct naming conventions for Unreal. So it has T underscore name of the project, so name of the substance save, so you can easily change that. Name of the texture set is only in there in case we have two materials per mesh or more. And then the correct suffixes for Unreal materials. You can always pause that if you want to copy those settings. Targa. We don't need to change anything else, just need to pick the location. Desktop. Geno. And export. So one thing I'm going to do is grab my Genos and put them in the Geno folder. So I have everything in one place. Go to Unreal Engine and let's make a new folder in here. Oops, misclick. And I'm going to grab my textures. So normally, if I was doing this for a real project, because I only have one material, I would just delete the stuff in the middle I don't need, Lambert 1 and underscore low. Geno low is coming in. Just make sure we do not create materials. Turn off import textures. Let's make it really big so we can see. And let's make a material. Geno, so this is all stuff we're going to cover in week 3, which will actually be week 5 for you guys, because you have Easter break. But I want to just show you the whole workflow here so you understand what we're doing. With mask textures, we're going to be learning about sRGB and why we need to turn it off on our Opaque textures as well, but once again, don't worry. Base color and base color, normal and normal, ambient occlusion, roughness, metallic. Just realized I didn't actually put any textures on the thing. Why not just put a quick bronze armor on there? Remember, we can. I changed the names though. In a normal situation, if I hadn't changed the names of the textures, I could just export these again, and it would overwrite them, and then I could re-import them into Unreal. But in this case, I can just do re-import with new file and grab the new one. Wrong one. Re-import with new file. Re-import with new file. Okay. So that's what we have so far. Why do I have static lights in the scene? So you can kind of see where we're going with this. I'll grab a new light here. Make sure it's movable. So this is okay, except obviously we don't have the mask yet. So we need to make a mask. And remember I said we were going to look at the maps we have. Seems like curvature is the best one to start with. Thickness. Sadly, the ID is stretched. Okay, whatever. We can do it by hand. So, in Photoshop, this one's not very clear. We could actually use the normal. Yeah, that's better. So what we're using this to do is as a template to make our opacity mask. And I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool for it. It's going to take a little bit of time. Sometimes, depending on what you're working on, the thickness map will basically already work as an opacity map, and you just have to take it into export that by going to export mesh maps from Substance Painter. Mesh maps are the maps you've made in the bake, remember? So all the ones that Substance Painter uses to apply your masks. And you just export that, bring it into Photoshop and just tweak the levels. In this case, we have to do it by hand, sadly. But it should be the same all the way along. So I'm hoping I can just do one part and copy it to the other part. I'm not being too precise. Obviously, it would take more time. Maybe even magnetic lasso would work here. If you like magnetic lasso or pen tool, however you like to work, however you're quickest. The example I did before, where I made the string that was baked onto the bottleneck transparent, where there was no string, I used the thickness map in Painter and it worked really well. So some different approaches are possible. So what we want to do is generate a mask, and I think we've talked enough about masks already, but just as a refresher, how do masks work? Oops, that was not... Did I just do a whole wrong pass there? God damn it. Okay, I got to start at this end. Doesn't like you negatively selecting outside the mesh for some reason, outside the frame. So why did I pick the normal map for this? Literally just because it had the clearest transition between the parts that are meant to be opaque and the parts that are meant to be transparent in terms of its color. The base color was very hard to tell because of what we call dilation. So you can see some dilation here, how the colors are bleeding out from the edges. And this is something that Substance Painter does to compensate for errors you might see in 3D when your textures are getting lodded or level of detail compressed down. Okay, getting there slowly but surely. Misclick. Feels bad. What you'll also notice with the dilation is that it can kind of make up for any points where I don't go quite up to the edge with my mask, right? Because the dilation is going to bleed the brass material outwards into the space where there's no mask. So back in the day when people made masked foliage textures in Photoshop, well, I believe people still do actually, you can actually manually add dilation in Photoshop for that purpose. It's pretty cool. But yeah, people sometimes wonder, like, what is this weird smudged pixels I'm seeing on my texture? And that is, it's called dilation, and it's there for a reason. I'm hoping and praying that we can just copy this part we're doing onto the bottom and be ready to go. So it's not the fastest process, like I said, but you know, you've got weeks taking an hour to really carefully cut out some edges on a mask that's going to save you 4,000 polygons. May well be worth your time. Okay, I'm going a little bit off the edge here, but I'm not going to worry too much. It's not my project. So when I was talking to Gino about this, he was talking about what's opacity, asking about what's opacity masks used for, and typical examples: foliage, feathers, fur and hair, cloth edges. So I think I showed you the flag I was working on in class the other day. Has an opacity mask for all the ripped damage around the edge. Pretty much all foliage. The leaves are just little square planes or little small low poly shapes, and then the delicate leaf edge It's just done with an opacity mask. We're suddenly there. So a quick reminder for those of you who don't remember what we did in the Photoshop lesson, holding Alt to do a negative selection. So I'm actually cutting out from the selection I've already done. And you can make opacity masks in Painter. Painter's default shader does not support transparency, but if you, in texture set settings, add a opacity channel, there's a, you can just Google how to do this. There'll be documentation from Algorithmic on how to do it, but you basically add an opacity channel and you change the shader from PBR Metal Rough to PBR Metal Rough with alpha blending, which basically gives it an alpha channel, aka a mask channel, which can determine the opacity of parts of the material. But in our case, we only need the opacity in Unreal, so there's no point in making the opacity in Painter. Okay. So let's get rid of these. I have a new layer already. I'm going to fill it in with black. I'm not going to sample all layers. I want to sample this layer that's empty so I can just fill the whole thing. Actually, I should fill it in with white. I could have just done it this way and inverted it, but you know. I'm going to duplicate this layer with Control plus J. Going to move it down. And I'm going to scale it. I think there's actually a flip vertical. Yeah, flip vertical. I'm going to zoom in so I can be pixel perfect here. And align it as it should be. It's not 100%, but obviously you can go back round, tidy it up. Then I'm going to make a new fill layer, or just a layer. It's Photoshop, not Painter. A new layer underneath these two layers, and fill this in with black. So here is our opacity mask. It's probably not perfect, but obviously we can go in and tweak it. And we can also tweak it in the material. So I'm going to go delete the background, which has color. I'm going to go to image mode, turn it to grayscale. Merge the layers when it prompts you. So grayscale images have only one channel. If we go back, before we had 3 channels. This is an RGB image. It has a red, green, and a blue channel, meaning it carries 3 times as much information per pixel as a grayscale image, right? So a grayscale image is cheaper. If we're not going to pack this black and white mask with anything else, we may as well make it grayscale to save on the size of the image. So go to image mode, grayscale, don't merge, sorry, do merge. Image mode, grayscale, I just do Control Z. Merge the layers. Now you can see we have one layer, one channel, this black and white. The image hasn't changed, it's now just less expensive. And we're going to save this in our folder we just made for Geno. I'm going to save it as a TGA as well. Same naming conventions, except I'm going to name it, instead of underscore normal, which is the base image we use, we're going to name it underscore mask, or opacity mask, or alpha, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to bring this texture into Unreal. Now, if I bring this into the material, we can see where it needs to go, right? When in mask mode, a material is either completely visible or completely invisible. But we can't plug this in. We can plug it in, but it doesn't do anything. Why is that? Well, if we click on our output node here, this is the end node that all your materials go into. We can see the properties of the material in general. So we have blend mode, opaque. This is the important one. We can switch this to a bunch of different types. Masked is what we're going for. Translucent is more expensive. It allows like transparency values of less than 1 and more than 0. So slightly opaque, slightly transparent, translucent. Masked is only opaque or transparent, black or white, binary. Yes, no. Additive and modulate, these are mathematical blend modes. So additive, it adds the pixels of the material to whatever's behind it. Modulate is more like a multiply. The others are more complicated and less commonly used outside of VFX stuff. So what are we going to do? We're going to set this to masked and hit apply. And then we're going to take, this is a grayscale, right? So all 3 channels are the same. So we should just pick any one of these, red, green, blue. I'm going to use red. It's a standard thing to do. Set the red into opacity mask. Apply. And let's go back into the world. And we can see we have this result. That's really cool. That looks good. We still have our baked normal information when the light moves. We're going to get dynamic lighting on the material. One problem is that we can't see the back, but that's easily fixed. Also, inside the material output node, we have a 2-sided checkbox. Turn this on, hit apply. You see our material's looking kind of funky on the material sphere now. That's pretty cool, actually. And there is our final result. So this thing, if we go into different modes, so under lit we have the different lighting modes. If we go to brush wireframe, you can see these are our polygons, right? This mesh does not have the polygons to support this cool shape, but if we look at it, it looks good enough. Yeah. So this is a really common trick for all kinds of stuff. Barbed wire fencing, for example, in games rarely has any 3D geometry. It's all just planes, vines and branches and stuff, all kinds of foliage. So let's have a quick look. High poly, 150,000. Low poly, 64. This is our mesh, and this is our result in Unreal Engine. Very happy with that. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys. If you can't get your high poly, sorry, your low poly under 5,000 because you have intricate stuff like this, this may be a good option for you.